Welcome to the Death by Adaptation podcast, a bi-weekly book club where we choose one classic book and compare and contrast it against its cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolò, Grasso, and happy Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. We're glad you're here with us, under the Christmas tree, or in your living room, or in a car, or wherever, listening to me and my good co-host, Ewan Gleadow, talk to you about a very, very special holiday movie. How are you doing, Ewan?
I'm doing pretty good. I recently found that I have a knowledge panel on Google because
Oh,
You've got one as well, haven't you?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, I've got one now as well. It's fantastic. No, it's very
Beautiful.
strange because it makes me feel a bit. My ego didn't need inflating any further than it already was, but it's really handy. It's great. It's even got a little blurb and everything. It's fantastic. How are you?
Doing good. I'm doing good. I'm very happy that the holidays are here. Which means less work, more time to read, watch movies, play games. I've gotten back into gaming recently. Like it's been bizarre.
Yeah.
I kind of dropped off gaming over the past few years for one reason or another. More like a proper like side hobby more than anything. But then
Mhm.
this year I was invited on a podcast to talk about games, the Jump Crouch podcast, which
Oh,
is very, very fun. I recommend everyone to listen to it. And when I went there, I was kind of like, man, it's been a while since I talked like just about video games for 90 minutes with someone who loves video games. And I'm back into the groove of things. I'm playing more than I should. I've subscribed myself to the Humble Bundle choice,
oh,
which is basically kind of like every month there's like 8 games for just like $8 or something. So it's fun. It's fun. I'm enjoying life. I'm trying to enjoy life more. Entering this new year, treating myself
to,
a little bit.
to
I
be
got a
fair, I've
job.
yeah, I started playing Team Fortress 2 again, which was like my absolute
Ah,
favorite when I was young.
I love
And
it.
I finished work a couple of days ago, and I thought, oh, I'll pop it open because for the past 2 years, the last times I played it, it was like just for the hats. I was like, maybe I'll give the
Mm,
actual game a go. Brilliant! I'm really good at it for some reason. Don't know
so
how,
well balanced. I love
but
Team Fortress.
yeah,
We should play it one
fantastic.
time or another.
Oh yes. Sod the podcast. We're going to play it now. Enjoy your Christmas. We'll see you later. Get me on Twitter, Ewan Gleadow, EWAN. Yeah. All right, we're off to play
I'm
Team
ready
Fortress
to
2.
scout around, jumping, double jumping all over the place. But before we jump into Team Fortress 2, and before we dive into this conversation, of course, as always, it's Christmas. It's the time of giving. Consider dropping a like, a follow, 5 stars if you enjoy this podcast. If you want to hear more from us, like whatever rocks your boat, we're very happy to have you here. We hope you come back into the future, and we hope you enjoy the following discussion, where we talk about Traumnovelle, which is Dream Story by Arthur Schnitzler, and the main adaptation, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Traumnovelle, or Dream Story, is a 1926 novella written by Arthur Schnitzler. He's a Austrian writer of Jewish origin and descent, and this element of his heritage, of his identity, has been prevalent throughout his writing. As I was researching Traumnovelle a little bit, I was reading up on multiple interpretations and multiple analysis of his work, and this element of racism and prejudice tends to find its way multiple times throughout his works. And it's also kind of key to Dream Story in a way, and we'll talk about that most likely. But this story, if you've seen Eyes Wide Shut, it kind of rings a bell. You have Dr. Fridolin, this Austrian doctor who went to a party with his wife, comes back home, they start chatting a little bit, and the wife just tells him, you know what, one time you think you know me that well, but actually I had this dream, very sexual dream of like, we were on holiday and there was this hunky sailor right there, and I kind of wish he just took me away and I could have dropped everything. I could have dropped you, my life, our daughter, and just go with him. And Dr. Fridolin kind of goes like, this is weird. Let me just leave. I don't like what you just told me. And so he goes on this journey, which is incredibly surreal and bizarre as he moves from household to household throughout this Austrian city, meeting different people, some patients, a prostitute, until he ultimately finds himself at a private party. Very elegant, very bizarre, that kind of makes his life spiral out of control. The morning after, though, everything seems to not have happened. Everything's weird, everything's off. Like, did he actually experience all of those things, or was it all a dream? Almost like this is called dream story. It's all connected in a way.
Oh,
Anyway,
I get it.
now it makes sense. Shit.
Oh, right. I see. I'm not even joking. Yeah, I get it now.
It's and yeah, it all ends rather nicely. He
It's
gets up
like
with
the
his wife again.
Matrix.
Ooh, oh,
But you...
okay. You're going to elaborate on that in just a
no,
second.
no, I'm not.
I'm
No, no further comment.
but yes, it all ends rather nicely. This man, Dr. Fridolin, just gets back together with his wife, just tells her everything that he's witnessed over the past few days, and in the end, what was real, what was just a dream, what was fantasy. Who knows? Let's talk about it. Ewan, what were your
Hello.
thoughts on Dream Story by Arthur Schnitzler?
Uh,
I love German pronunciations so
it's
much.
okay. It's all right. I know I do like, haha, it's okay, it's all right, and then I jump into why I actually like something. No, this one's just okay, it's fine.
Okay.
I read it this morning because, of course, I did.
It is a
Um,
breezy read, right?
really quick. Like, I definitely didn't torrent it, and I definitely read it legally. But it's what a short book it is, especially when you zoom out. Um,
Just
it's
5 pages. Character
it's just
one.
5 pages. There is a real. I think, to be fair, I watched the film long before I'd read the book.
Mhm.
So part of that was always in my mind. But even when you move that past and you kind of subvert as much as you can, it's still just kind of there. It's okay. It's nothing really stuck out as like, wow, that's amazing. It was just a conscious stream of thought narrative that
Mhm.
had been done a couple of years prior by James Joyce, but this one's just a lot shorter and a lot less detailed. When really this is a story that needs detail. It needs articulation. It needs that mystery. That mystery is there. Dream Story captures that. I can't take that away from it. That's probably one of the best parts of it. What it doesn't have is the sort of more sincere analysis, the sort of actual resolutions, the actual clarifications, the actual interesting bits that are kind of pieced together later down the line by the audience themselves.
Mhm.
Um, there are some really strong moments that are kind of surreal and anxiety ridden, but the stuff that works is far too short, and the stuff that doesn't work is essentially the main scope of the book. I thought it was okay. I wouldn't can't knock it. It's not as if it took me like weeks to read. It's not like, I don't know, Dubliners didn't take that long.
Oof.
Dubliners was quite short actually. I'm thinking of Ulysses. Either way, a lot of James Joyce,
James Joyce.
lot of Freud stuff in this as well. But I imagine that's because it was sort of the same time period when this was written. Freud's work was getting popularized, which is rather telling because it's very
Mm.
on it, and it's also just sort of halfway there to understanding it, but on the same page, it's kind of halfway far from it. Real mixed bag for me on this one, but it's I think even if you ignore some of the sort of glaring issues with it, it's still kind of just not as particularly special as it should be perceived. I think it does a lot in the way of writing about sex, but it
Mm.
doesn't do much in the actual structure of a narrative or anything unique in that regard because it's either borrowing from Freud or borrowing from James Joyce.
It's a good, lovely James Joyce. I don't think have there ever been any adaptations of his work because I kind of need an excuse
Um,
to actually sit down and reread Ulysses.
I read Dubliners when the power went off at my office when I worked at my
Oh.
uni, and I would rather have just sat in the freezing cold staring at the wall than read another James Joyce book. But I do have a copy of Ulysses somewhere in the big pile of books behind me that I will have to
Mm.
get through next year. I've left it too late to start it now. There's no way if I start it now, it's not getting finished until like next year,
So
which just
like
feels weird.
April.
I can't carry it over. I've got to what I'm doing now is you got to read short stuff to sort of pad out the rest of the year. Got a few little Graham Greene books to keep me going through the cold winter nights.
And he's like, I've read 60 books this year. It's like, yeah, most of them are like 100 pages long. Then
Nobody
you
look
get
at my Goodreads goals.
same
It's
with me, honestly. Like for every like collection of short stories I've read, I still am trying to finish The Stand with Stephen King.
oh,
It's just sitting there on my shelf,
get
just
it
halfway
read.
through it.
It's every time. I remember the very first year I had Goodreads. I'd gotten it at the back end of December. It was like, "Do you want to set a reading target?" It's like it's the 27th of December. Sure, I'll set it for 2. I read Michael Caine's autobiography and an essay by Hunter S. Thompson.
Hey, got like started somehow. It's a
Yeah.
good
Oh yeah.
start, good beginning,
I'm
good way
gonna.
to cheat the system.
Oh yeah.
It's
It's
like I've reached my goal.
it's the endorphin rush of seeing something click and go, "Congratulations, you've read 2 books."
Yeah, yeah, it's all about the endorphins. Similarly to what our good friend Fridolin does during his trip. I have to say, I quite enjoyed this book. I don't know if I would say that I loved it per se, but I found it to be quite the interesting read, especially because similarly to you, I watched Eyes Wide Shut years ago. So, but I remembered it rather clearly. And going through the book, it's pretty much beat for beat the same story. And interestingly enough, I ended up watching the movie when I only had the last chapter left to read, or the last two chapters left to read in the book. So it was kind of like witnessing again all of the things in the film just kind of play out and go, yeah, the book is like the adaptation is very similar. But what I think is the key difference between the movie that we'll talk about in a little bit and the book is the setting. This is an Austrian book written in the 1920s, part of the decadent movement, this kind of glorification of just excess and pleasure. Everything is about just death, just following this. Europe is dying. We had all of these revolutions in the 19th century. We started off the new century with a terrible war, and so people are kind of just giving up on life in a way. So why follow something virtuous? Why follow something that's higher than mortality? Like, enjoy pleasure, indulge in it. And so you have this nightmarish, you could even say, trip that the good doctor goes through, that's very much about sex and pleasure and lust and uh, different forms of it. And I find myself at the end of the book kind of wondering how much Schnitzler, the author, is in favor of these things. Is he looking at, these prostitutes from afar in a kind of negative way, kind of like, yeah, they're doing their job, but it's not something that I would personally do, or is he kind of supportive of that? And I think that ambiguity that I found in the writing made it very intriguing to go through reading the book, but also it just moves very quickly. Like, that's something that completely surprised me. While other books would spend, like we've read some recently as well, where there's like, I don't know, 15 pages just two people chatting. In this book, it's literally him going like, yeah, Dr. Friedling went to the hotel and they asked the man at the entrance that looked very nicely, like, what happened here last night? And he just told him that this thing happened. And so Friedling kind of understood what was going on and he left. Okay, it's like in three short sentences that was a scene. That's literally like a scene from the movie. And so it makes it very breezy to read, very enjoyable. um I would say slightly rewarding in a way, but because it's a 1924 book that's not meant to be particularly grotesque or gratuitous, so it doesn't lose itself in any explicit detail. There's barely any mention of nudity, I believe, in this. It's very tactfully written. It is lacking that extra bite to make it truly click with me, but still, I found it to be rather nice, rather nice book. But what did you think about this exploration of sexuality, and the fact that essentially this doctor goes on this journey because his wife just told him, like, yeah, I had an erotic fantasy of maybe leaving you and my daughter for this sailor. I mean, I don't know, I mean, I literally saw just once, but he just took my breath away.
It's it's really quite smart in how simple that is as sort
Mm,
of a launch pad, where it is just sort of a reaction to lust and desire, like you mentioned there, sort of the period of gluttony, especially if you looked at America in the 20s, where it's the Roaring Twenties, Great Gatsby speeding away on a motorboat, the usual stuff, the usual remit of the 1920s. But if you go to Europe in that time, and it is genuinely quite grim. Sorry, but I'm just going to flex my A level history here when Germany and countries from the fallout of the First World War were paying reparations. They were loaning money from America to essentially make up for lost time and to keep themselves on the path to not falling and collapsing in on themselves. And it was a terrifying time. So there's
hmm
really that period where it's a lot of willpower over gluttony, especially in Europe, where it would be very easy to drop into that. It would be very easy to, at the time, what was perceived as dropping down to that level of sin. And there's a real quality to the book where it's very focused on that. It's very engaged with what was perceived as sin at the time, prostitution, sort of the remit of leaving for an easier life elsewhere, the family unit, etc., etc. And
Hmm.
it's all compartmentalized in a contemporary way, and it's really interesting. I don't know, as far as it goes for sort of an analysis of sexuality and an analysis of that gluttony in the period. I think it does waver towards a little bit of criticism in the sense that just from the period of time where, what's his name, War Arthur, the man himself, where Arthur's from and where that upbringing has brought him and what the period around him is. It would be very hard to look around and say, that'd be a lovely idea. Popping onto the sailor's boat and sailing off into the sunset. That would be quite nice. So I do think inherently there is a sense of criticism to it as a sort of, it would be a weak thing to do to leave a difficult life behind. You should pursue the difficult path, etc., etc.
You're
Um,
responsible.
yeah, you got to be responsible. You can't just, lop off your hair and move to a different country. I have lopped off my hair. I'm not planning on like a move to Morocco anytime soon, but it's on the cards.
That's what you
Certainly.
say now.
It's what I say now, but when I don't show up to the next podcast recording, you'll know for a fact I've opened up a taverna in Morocco.
It's like I knew it. He went to Morocco.
There does feel to be sort of not an embarrassment at writing about the sexuality in the book, but a kind of a need to get through it as quickly as possible,
Hmm.
where the writing is. I suppose the supposed impact would be that it's quick, it's fast, it's brutal, and it gets the job done. It doesn't, and it just makes him feel a bit squeamish around gluttony, which I suppose is the point of the book, but for the point of the writing, it just makes it look like he's sort of not detailing it as thoroughly as he should.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if some of these other books kind of explore similar themes as well. I haven't been able to find time to actually delve deeper into his bibliography outside of reading essays on it. But yeah, it's definitely like you definitely do feel this. It kind of reminded me, not a tangent, but German expressionism, talking about Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, Murnau, Lang, all of those filmmakers from Germany that during the 1920s were portraying these magical worlds, this blurring the line between reality and fantasy. And when you were talking earlier, just this image just popped in my mind of like, yeah, this is almost the writing equivalent of that, of German expressionism. You can feel the trauma of post World War One Europe, kind of like recovering itself from, especially essentially defeat, like the Austro-Hungarian government and Germany, like those countries were not doing well, like you mentioned, and you feel like the fact that Schnitzler was Jewish, and there are multiple Jewish characters in here, where it like explicitly describes them as such, and you feel a sense of animosity towards them, like the people, the characters in the book kind of treat them not in the best of ways. Not only does it show you kind of the what interested Schnitzler a bit more than just the sensuality and that side of things with the story, but also just the unease that was going through in Europe. And if you think that in just 10 years after when the book came out, like in 1926, we said, yeah, a few years later you'd have Hitler coming to power, and Schnitzler didn't even witness any of that because he died in 1941. I'm just reading right here. So, well, he missed a darker time for Europe. He got
He did.
lucky.
I'd hate to see what he had to write about the period from 1939 to 1945. I think he'd be a little more upset.
If he
Um,
survived that.
there are
Poor man.
so I'm just looking at his bibliography. I've not actually read this, but Lieutenant Gustel is, I've definitely butchered the pronunciation of that, but Lieutenant Gustel is about the Austrian crisis in 1901. So he's definitely
Hmm.
not a social commentator, but sort of a man that has his eye on culture and politics of the time and has a response to it.
Yeah.
Fiction or non-fiction, it works. Um, whether or not that's good or not is beyond me. I've not read it, and I probably never will. My life is too short to be reading books from people I don't particularly care for. But what we can gather from Dream Story is there is a real ability here to actually commentate on what's going on around him. Regardless of what his thoughts are, there is a conscious effort to commentate on something that's happening.
Hmm.
And to do that successfully, I mean, I'm not particularly a fan of the book, but he does successfully capture the period, and he successfully captures the issues at hand in that period. Um, that's a lot harder to do than would be first assumed. I mean, if you look at stuff today that releases, the quality to quantity ratio of things that are good at criticizing modern life and public stuff to books that actually do that successfully, there's a massive schism. There is very little that can actually criticize it accurately or
Yeah.
even interestingly. I mean, the best I can think of is kind of like Spitting Image. They revived that, which was a BBC comedy in the 80s about puppets and stuff. And the remake was just, haha, or Donald Trump is orange, haha, Joe Biden's got no memory. It's like, right, brilliant.
Oh,
That's
jeez.
classic stuff, lads. But there's kind of no, even the worst of commentary, as long as it understands the period, as long as it does something
Hmm.
interesting with it. I think Dream Story does something interesting. It's just it's been, adapted a little better elsewhere later down the line, which I
Hmm.
don't think. I know we're going to breach the access of how we do this podcast, but it's very difficult to write a book and then have it compared to Stanley Kubrick. Like that's just it's not fair.
It's yeah, it's very very few people could do it. We talked about freaking Clockwork Orange, Burgess earlier this year, and and that gets very close. But Schnitzler tried. He gave it his best shot. It didn't. The movies probably didn't even watch any movies. It's 1926. Maybe he saw a couple of them at the cinema. If it was a thing when he was living in Germany, maybe he was too old for it. These youngsters are going to the movies. What's this D.W. Griffith fella? I don't know. But is there any scene in particular in this book that stands out to you, despite not particularly loving it or even liking it? But was there any moment while you were reading it you said, "This is there's something here more so than in other parts of it"?
I think the moment where he's in the palace and the
Hmm.
nun is essentially she comes out and says just go and she takes the fall from him. I thought that was such an interesting comment on the sanctity of it all, and there's a rich stream to follow there, and he's like right back to his house. Oh, he's woken up, and it's like no, 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 go back, go back, go back, and
He's like
there's a
dressed as a monk as well, which was
dressed as a monk,
interesting.
and there's such a secular unity to it that's so strange, and it really is fascinating that bit. It's very sinister and it's very creepy and
Mm.
it feels like the real push to make a real statement about what he's been going on about for the past 60 pages, which is essentially sexual perversion in the 1920s. And then he kind of bottles it. He kind of just backs out and goes, "Ah, yeah, that's a good one. Nuns can take the fall." It's like, right, okay. But that was such an interesting scene. I thought it was a strange scene in the sense of if you read that through and just think, "Oh, well, why is she sacrificing herself?" To go that layer deeper, it's a really nice commentary on the perceptions of society at the time. Again, it's one of those things where he's accurately demonstrated an understanding of the period around him. He knows what he's saying. It's just not done in a way that is either inherently interesting or actually any good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that entire sequence in the palace is quite interesting. Going into it, having seen the movie, everyone knows the iconography of that moment. But seeing it in the book, yes, it is more quaint. It is more. You said secular, which is a beautiful word. It has this aura of just spirituality and sanctimony. Where it's like, okay, okay, very different. Like it doesn't indulge in any orgastic moments. It barely alludes at them. But the actual scene that kind of I found quite interesting was the old conversation with the pianist that Fridolin finds at the bar, his old friend, his old buddy, and they have multiple conversations. Uh, and then the pianist is the one who's going to the party, and he tells Fridolin like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to get the password um, from the carriage driver," and it's like, "Okay, and I'm gonna go to the shop, and then you're gonna enter the bar." Like the exchange of the password, the fact that you don't have a phone to just send an SMS message or whatever, or just give a quick call, like, "Yeah, this is the password, fella." Like it grounds it more so than other parts, because it, like, as I was reading this book, I kind of was forgetting that this was set in 1926. It doesn't linger too much on the sense of time and place in a way, to the point that when it gets to the section, I was like, "Yeah, but this is just sending a message." It's like, oh wait, there's no messages. There's not even any cars really. It's just he has to get in a carriage. It's driven by horses, you know. But the entire conversation is one of those moments where you can feel, it's a man talking to another man, talking about their relationship, the fact that the pianist has a wife in another state, or like far, far away with four children, and the doctor kind of thinks to himself like, yeah, this doesn't seem like he really cares about her. Like he's just off there. It's very interesting. I think there's some commentary there potentially of the role of females in society at the time. I think that element is present in the book, but kind of like you mentioned, it's not really at the forefront of Schnitzler's writing. It's not at the forefront of his idea of his mind of what he wants to talk about with this novella. Sorry, but yeah, that scene definitely stood out to me. Um, but speaking of scenes that stand out, we have the movie. We have Eyes Wide Shut,
Well,
1999. Woo, Stanley Kubrick. This film was a mess to make.
I
Like,
thought you
oh,
were gonna go and call it a masterpiece. Like, oh, what a masterpiece! No, it was a shit show.
it was an absolute, like, basically you have 1996 pretty much when this is announced. Stanley Kubrick, after having made masterpiece after masterpiece, from Path of Glory, Spartacus 2001, Doctor Strange, like so many classics. He ended up making Full Metal Jacket, and then he made his only movie from the 90s, which is Eyes Wide Shut. He managed to get a real life couple, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, to star together in a movie that isn't the terrible Ron Howard one. A way to kind of,
You,
pick themselves up again
you
as
say
a screen
terrible Ron
couple.
Howard one as if Ron Howard's only made one bad movie rather than the 14 in his filmography.
I would almost say it's 50-50. I haven't seen all of them, so maybe it's higher the percentage of just worse movies.
It's rather telling that all of the Ron Howard films I've seen have left me with disgust.
Oh.
Hillbilly Elegy, Angels and Demons. Um,
Angels and Demons has to be an episode somewhere down the line, like 2026. I think it's good year, good year to delve into Dan Brown and
I
Ron Howard on crack.
I haven't seen in Da Vinci Code, but I have seen Angels and Demons. I don't know why. Um,
Angels and Demons is fun trash, I'd say. Da Vinci
yeah,
Code was boring when I watched it. I was like, oh, what? Where's Ewan McGregor parachuting out of a flying helicopter with a nuclear bomb or whatever nonsense was in that film? Uh,
the only thing I know about the Da Vinci Code is that the copy I've got cost me 10p. So that really does speak to the
ooh,
quality of that text. I think it was printed that often, to be fair. So
that's, I still say it's a rip-off considering the movie, but 10p. But yes, Ice Witch Shot, like as always, Kubrick is a perfectionist, and this film took almost 2 years to shoot. He had Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman sign a contract where they were like, "Yeah, we're not doing anything else. Like we're shooting this film as long as it needs to." So they literally moved to the UK, to London, had a house there for over a year just because they were shooting Eyes Wide Shut. To the point that you had, like, by the time the movie started filming and it finished and it was released, you have Boogie Nights coming out, Paul Thomas Anderson becoming really, really famous, and he went on to the set of Eyes Wide Shut to ask Tom Cruise to star in Magnolia, and Magnolia pretty much came out around the same time. This 3 hour epic drama came out at the same time as Eyes Wide Shut, which is just amazing.
I mean, it speaks to the level of sort of reshoots that Kubrick would do. Was it Harvey Keitel that walked off the set and said this just isn't going to work, and he
Yes,
just left?
he had Harvey Keitel in the role of the Dr. Friend, who ended up being played by Sidney Pollack, the filmmaker,
Yeah,
Dr. Ziegler. Harvey Keitel, apparently Keitel wasn't, allegedly, he wasn't the nicest person to work with on set, Even Nicole Kidman wasn't too keen on him. So, after a couple months probably of filming, like I wonder if there's a Keitel cut lying around somewhere of this movie. Doubtful, but
what, like Apocalypse Now?
pretty much, yeah. It's just this alternate cut. It's like all the money in the world put back Keitel in the film. But Stanley Kubrick had a final cut ready. Some sound, some music were missing. Showed it to Warner Bros. Executives. They liked it. It just died out of nowhere. shockingly so, making
Yeah.
this his final movie. But his children in his estate saw the final edit through. They added the music. The film premiered at the Venice Film Festival in 1999, and it went on to be his highest grossing film of all time, probably due to the star appeal, but also a lot of questions that people had. The
Yeah.
main one being, what is Eyes Wide Shut about? Ewan, what are your
Oh,
thoughts on Eyes Wide Shut? And what
come
is
on to
about?
the. Oh god.
This easy question.
It is an easy question. It's about naivety. It's about
Mm.
mainly because I googled it about 10 minutes before we started. It's like, oh, good, Sparks notes. No, I swear down before I'd Google it, I thought this is about naivety in the face of genuine sort of embarrassing circumstances. I think it speaks a lot for the film where it talks on masculinity. If anything, it's the approach of your partner of X amount of years has said, "Oh, I had a dream, then you weren't in it. You were nowhere in my life." I think the psychological effect of that is analysed really nicely in Ice White Shut. I think it's really interesting. It's to the point where it just seems like, oh, what's that film? I say, oh, what's that film as if I had an example ready to go there.
That helps.
No, but it feels like one of those films where you're just watching someone for a day in their life, and there's no
Like
real
Jean Dillman?
reason. Yeah,
Number one Sights and Sound, best film of all time, Jean Dillman.
I've not seen it because if I want to watch someone make a cup of tea, I will make my mother make a cup of tea in the kitchen and just stand in the corner. But I imagine it's
It's
quite good.
great. It's a great
Is
film.
it
I
good?
love it. Yeah, yeah.
I'll give
I
it a
love
watch.
Chantal Ackerman.
I was about to say, oh yeah, I'll give it a watch, but I said I'd watch Satan Tango about 4 years ago, and I've not made it through. I've got it legally sourced.
Yeah. I mean, by the
Nobody
time
can see the smile.
you can watch Jean Dillman twice, and Satan Tango would still be going on. So
Oh, I think I'll just stick with the Bruce Willis action films.
there's a
He's
new
got another one
Christmas
out.
one.
He's got
Speaking
another.
of
Yeah.
Christmas,
You know what? I'm
amazing.
watching that after this recording.
Yes,
Getting in the
yes.
festive spirit.
Anyway, you were saying,
Anyway,
sorry.
yes, there is a sense of naivety. There is a sense of deconstruction of masculinity. There is a sense of, again, that secular notion that's found in the novel, and I think that's
Mm.
one of the few things that is transferred over. Um, with this being a modernization, it does lose a lot of what the novel was aiming for, but that's more through the process of time than Kubrick's disregard for history. Um, Even then, there is what replaces it is fantastic. There is more depth, there is more versatility, there is more reasoning that involves the viewer as well as involves the sort of message that it's going for, which I'm not too clear on. But I think that's the beauty of it. It's that there is a naivety to it, eyes wide shut. It's like that as a title alone conjures up so much imagery more so than
Oh
dreams,
yeah.
cowardly stuff. Arthur, pull your finger out. Um, it's it's certainly quite the statement that this was his last film. I think even if he hadn't passed away, I think this would have been his last film because the man was 70. You don't spend that long in production on a film and then fire Harvey Keitel to go and let's do it again, everyone. Um, I do, yeah. There's a lot going on in this film, and I'm not smart enough to understand all of it. But what I do understand are the bits that are kind of reflective and self-serving and really quite interesting. It essentially elongates a novel that was barely a pamphlet into something absolutely beautiful.
Wow, 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 wow. Bold statements. Well, I'll make an even bolder statement. Uh,
Oh,
Eyes Wide Shut is my favorite Stanley Kubrick film, and one of my
oh,
absolute favorite films of all time. I first watched it back in 2017, early 2018. I watched it, and I was blown away by it. It was at the time where I was like fully discovering cinema, and I was like, let's just finish watching all of Stanley Kubrick's films. This is the right time, 21, whatever, it was 20 years old, yeah. So I was like, let's do it, and I was just blown away by it. And revisiting it now, it just solidified itself as my favorite of his films. I know I said I really love Clockwork Orange when we did the episode with the good Carson Timar. I was actually supposed to be here on this episode, but sadly couldn't make it. Um, so hi Carson,
busy,
we hope you're doing well.
busy
Um,
hang gliding.
Probably, yeah. Together with Ewan McGregor outside of a parachute carrying a nuclear bomb. Um, but there is something so alluring about Eyes Wide Shut. I cannot even really like. Let's try explaining why. This film, more so than the book, manages to capture what it feels to have desires that feel wrong but shouldn't be. And more importantly, to me at least, this captures the importance of communication in a
Yes.
relationship. That's kind of like at the key of the entire film for me, because you start off this story with, you know, it's a party, it's a nice Christmas party, a Tommy Boy and then Nicole Kidman go into it. Top, I think the casting is ingenious on Kubrick's part, because you could have gotten other, nice actors for the role, but by getting a real life couple, putting them in this type of narrative, but most importantly, getting Tom Cruise, a man who's known for being charismatic as hell, with this massive grin that some people just want to slap off his face. It's just like, stop grinning like a maniac. He's so annoyingly likable, you could even say. And this is coming from someone who absolutely loves Tom Cruise, but he always has this nice smile, like, you can see all my teeth. They're all white, splendid. He puts him in the role of basically kind of a scumbag man. This person, this doctor, he's just not likable. He's flirting, freely flirting with two women at this party, and kind of pretending like nothing's really going on. And they very, very explicitly imply they want to have sex with him. And he's just going along with it. He's not telling them like, "No, I have a wife," which is what the wife does. The wife doesn't like the party. She's getting shit faced drunk. But she still has the integrity and the honesty when a man flirts with her to kind of tease him a little bit, but then to ultimately say no, and kind of like, no means no, like, get away from me, I'm married and I'm not doing this. And already shows you just how much more, how stronger she is, and already makes you root for her a little bit more. And when they have the iconic argument scene where Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman are just kind of shouting at each other in the bedroom, and you have the, her kind of retelling the dream and the erotic fantasy that she experienced when they were on holiday, it it puts at the forefront what was just kind of a side element to me in the novel by Schnitzler, the element of just, man versus female, masculinity and femininity, and just how impossible it is to perceive for a man that a woman can have desires. That's kind of the entire argument is kind of like, oh yeah, Tom Cruise says, yeah, man can be in love with someone and just, oh yeah, I see this girl and she looks sexy, I'd probably go to sleep with her. It's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And Nicole Kidman just replies kind of, what? And women kind of think the same thing of men, that's different in some way. And I love that it just, Kubrick took that argument from the book and kind of emphasizes the dichotomy of male and female desire. And that's the thing that makes Tom Cruise just spiral out of control. Just the idea that the wife can have a sexual dream, a fantasy. I'm just kind of like, yeah, I thought the sailor was hot and I would have wanted to just live my entire life with him. She didn't, because that would have made no real sense. But in the moment, she felt lust, she felt desire, and she couldn't act upon it, even with him, even with the husband. And she couldn't tell him that. If they had an open a relationship that was open, that was truthful, none of this would have happened. But you can tell that there's a clear difference. You could even say a patriarchal society. And I know the good Jakub Flash, if he's hearing this, it's just triggering him right now. Hi, Jakub. Um, but it is kind of, this masculine patriarchal society where women have to act in a certain way. And to me, like, to the question, like, what is Eyes Wide Shut about? Eyes Wide Shut is an odyssey. We mentioned James Joyce, Ulysses. This is an odyssey, a sexual odyssey of a man kind of coming to grips with the fact that women are sexual beings. Throughout this entire journey, he's just witnessing woman after woman, from a prostitute to a teenager, to this orgy, to like all of these different women, to a kind of friend of his, like the daughter of a patient who dies, like all of these women who show desire and lust and sexuality and sensuality and eroticism, and he has to come to grips with it. It's just, this is how the world is, and this is a reality, and it's scary because it's scary to him. We're seeing everything through his eyes, and it's just uncomfortable. Like, he loves the attention that some of these women give him, but he also doesn't like that he isn't fully in power most of the time. And that's so fascinating, so fascinating. I've rambled on Far enough. I love this film so much. I think it's impeccably made. Yes, sorry. I don't know if you have any comments to this
No,
ramble.
I think it's an okay film. Yeah, it's all right.
It's
No,
like, yeah,
it
it's a
is
three and a
it
half.
is. Yes, no, it is very good, and I think what you've touched on there is more or less everything I had to say about it. What I was thinking when you were talking there was sort of, especially with adaptations, obviously, the book comes first, and then years down the line, a film is made of it. There is something to be said of the modernization of it. There is something
Hmm.
to be said of how the change in context is not in the words of the book, but in the sort of creation of the world around it. It was a very different
Yes.
time in the 20s to it is in the 90s to it is now. So to look back and reflect on all of those periods is so truly unique.
Hmm.
It's, where Eyes Wide Shut is now with the sort of sexualization of men and women. Because I do think it sexualizes men as well, but I think more
Hmm?
so women, because the whole point of it is to give them power through sexuality, which I think is great. I think Kubrick does that really well. I think Nicole Kidman is a bastion for that,
Oh,
as sort
yes.
of the trigger point of telling someone their desires and having them go into a meltdown says not just a lot for masculinity's sake, but it also says a lot about the femininity of it. I think it's a really good dichotomy that they've got going, and I do think it helps that they were actually were they married by the time this film came
They
out,
were,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
or was
They'd
Nicole
been married
Kidman
for a
freed?
few years.
Yeah, because the only
Uh,
thing I know about the Tom Cruise Nicole Kidman thing is that image of her outside, sort of celebrating like she's just won an Oscar. Is
Amazing,
that from
amazing.
there? Yeah, stunning.
It's. I want to say it's 2001. I'm trying to find the actual dates of how long they'd been married.
2001. No, that was the space one. That was 1969.
They got married in 1990, and they had two children. And
Oh wow!
she filed for divorce in 2001. Yeah, there we
I
go.
didn't realize Tom Cruise had kids. I kind of just saw him as like a sexless being that was
I
in Mission
know,
Impossible.
right? That's what
He's like,
I was
yeah.
shocked when I read that. I was like, they had children together.
I'm shocked that Tom Cruise is like 60. To be fair,
Yeah,
it's that
yeah.
Scientology magic that they're rubbing into him. It's like I look older than Tom Cruise, like But I think that's because
Which
I've got the new haircut. To be fair,
you're very close. You're very close. But it is true, actually. Like, the fact of the Scientology thing is kind of interesting as well, considering the movie and some of the elements of the movie. Where
yeah,
basically the marriage with Nicole Kidman, she did not like Scientology. She did not marry him for that at all, and she actually managed to kind of remove him a little bit from the grips of the church. And they didn't like that. And they kind of used all of the things that happened with the movie and some of the behind the scenes drama. Kubrick had them confront each other multiple times, talking to him privately about, some of the things that weren't working in their relationship, so that he could actually use it on screen as drama. Just, questionable ethics probably from Kubrick most of the
Kubrick's a bit of
times.
a dick in that regard. The
Yes,
obvious one is Shelley Duvall on The
yes,
Shining.
that's a rough one.
But there are other little ones like, I mean, I say little, but they're actually monumentally horrible things to do, like Eyes Wide Shut, and it's a bit gruesome what he
Mm.
did, and I suppose that's the line, isn't it? Where how much of the art within Eyes Wide Shut and how much of the art within Kubrick's filmography comes from him putting people in uncomfortable situations that then go on to change their life for ill or for good. I
Hmm.
always think of Malcolm McDowell when A Clockwork Orange came out, and he severed contact with McDowell afterwards. It's like, okay, right, brilliant. And I know McDowell went on to do If and Britannic Hospital and stuff, and he had a very successful career in that regard.
Yeah.
There is also the argument to be made that starring in Home Alone 5 after you've been in a Kubrick movie is not par for the course.
Yeah, that's something I was wondering watching Eyes Wide Shut, is that outside of this film and maybe just Jack Nicholson from The Shining, most of his leading men didn't really have the stellar career that
Yeah.
most people would expect would come now from a Kubrick production. Which is not to say that like Ryan O'Neal or like you mentioned Malcolm McDowell or what's the protagonist of Full Metal Jacket? I keep forgetting his name. I always think of
Oh,
Vincent
Matthew
D'Onofrio.
Moore.
Yes, yes, Matthew
Matthew
Modine.
Modine, I only know because I reviewed a film that he was in a few years ago, and the producer of the film got in touch with me to tell me that my review was shit, and that
Oh,
the film had won, and I quote, 12 film festivals. It hadn't won awards; it had won festivals.
And
So
just the entirety of the festival, every award to the movie. What was the
it's
movie actually? Can you
I don't
disclose that?
remember the name of it, but I remember my own name, so that's rather telling about which one is better. No, it
but
was
yeah, like,
about like court. It was like a really boring legal drama. It was like The Verdict, but without star power.
no, but I like Matthew Modine, but again, like he's not a household name outside of maybe like
No,
more
no,
recently Stranger Things. Like he ended up making primarily movies with Abel Ferrara, had a smaller role in like a couple Nolan films, but nothing where you could
yeah.
say like it's not Jack Nicholson and it's not Tom Cruise. And
Abel Ferrara's a nice man.
we love
we
Abel
had the
Ferrara. We
we had the
stand
pleasure of
Abel
we had the
Ferrara.
pleasure of meeting him. What a year it's been.
Shitting my pants with him screaming at us. Can I
It
take the
was,
picture?
you know, when he did that. I mean, I was stood next to you when you were getting the photo, and he just, I saw his eyes, and I thought, if I don't move, he's going to like grab my coat and start throwing me at walls. So I just moved out of the way.
Just if he's like, yeah, that's a death stare if I've ever seen.
I've never felt fear like that before. Like really, like
The
fear. Like that
only
was
other time I
horrifying.
had it was with Udo Kier, which is also
Udo, oh
it's also another one that's crazy. But anyway, all of this to say that the fact that this movie kind of brought Tom Cruise to get back with Scientology, to the point that Nicole Kidman again ended up divorcing him because of all the problems that were arising again. Because Scientology isn't nice. Also, please don't come for us. Um,
yeah, please leave me alone. You know, I
we're
actually almost when I was at uni, so there was a Scientology place like pretty much over the road, and
ooh.
my big idea was, oh, I'll just go knock on the door and interview them. And several of the lecturers told me, don't do that. That's not a good idea. It's like, oh, why not? Louis Theroux did it. It's like, yeah,
And he's still alive.
he is, yes, kind of.
Well, did you get any good Awake magazines?
No, I stayed clear. It was for some reason, right? To put it into perspective about UK Scientology, the Scientology church was opposite of Greg's, so it's kind of par for the course, really. You
It
pop
feels
in,
all your needs.
you get a bit of brainwash, and then you go and get a sausage roll. It's the British way.
As it should be, as it should be.
I
Um,
I like to think that the Scientology stuff is like the actual cult in Eyes Wide Shut, and that has prompted Tom Cruise to reminisce.
I'm super curious actually about this because we talked about this in the Clockwork Orange episode. Pretty much every single Stanley Kubrick film boils down, in the general consciousness, boils down to one scene. All of them, all of them. Like for people who have not seen them, it's just the one scene, and for people who haven't seen Eyes Wide Shut, it's the orgy scene. Oh my god! How do you feel about not only the way this is portrayed in comparison to the book, where it's highly cinematic, and instead of dressing up as monks and nuns, everyone's dressed as everyone's just
The
wearing
Venetian
Venetian
masks and
masks,
stuff, yeah.
and it's just naked underneath, just wearing black cloaks and whatnot. How do you feel about this entire sequence, this entire moment, which has been analyzed to death for better or worse?
I, I think I know which bit you're on about because I used it as the header image when I reviewed it about 2 years ago. Um, yeah, I think it's. I suppose on the one hand, it's rather telling that this is one of the most analysed scenes in Kubrick's filmography because it is. It says a lot about not just the performances on screen, but as well as that the actual active choices to change the text. I mean, there's no Venetian masks that I was aware of in Dream Story. It's a very active choice. It has a lot of history, and it's Kubrick sort of cementing his own name on a project that he's adapting, which I love to see. I wish more directors would sort of do it to that extent,
Hmm.
where they take a text that is kind of essentially it's a foundation for what Kubrick wants to talk about, and that scene, the cult scene, it's so much more visually exciting than anything I could do, and I guess that just makes me sound boring, but I would never have imagined the sort of like the velvety carpets, the sort of the black robe circle, the golden
Yeah.
chair. It visually it inspires something, and I think it doesn't have that effect with the book because it's so brief. I think there's such a brevity to it. Where on the other hand, Eyes Wide Shut is spending a good 2.5 hours fleshing out these characters, detailing them as real people with lived-in lives, with children, with family, with dreams, with hopes, with
Yeah.
crucially with desire for something that they don't have and will not have. I think that's the real fundamental for this, is that sort of Nicole Kidman's character, who I can't remember the name of because I don't bother remembering names anymore, is
Uh,
oh
Alice.
Alice, a very difficult name to remember, I must admit. No, because I mean, the whole point of Alice's desire is kind of, oh, it's just, haha, I had a dream. What an interesting dream that was. But it causes a spiral that leads man to go and visit a cult. It's it's the fragility of a masculine man who has to wear platforms in his shoes and pounces down the street looking for reasons why his wife would do such a thing when she hasn't actually done anything. It's
Yeah.
such an interesting perspective, and I think the real reason that all works is because of Kubrick. I think regardless of how great the performances are, which by the way they're superb, I
Mm.
think what's his name?
Pollock.
Sidney Pollack. Yeah, he's stunning in this. He's brilliant.
I cannot
I
see
wish he
Harvey
was in
Keitel
more.
in the role, honestly.
No, I think Sidney Pollack. Every time he shows up, I remember watching Tootsie, and he just shows up in that,
Hey,
and he's brilliant. Um, I think he's in a couple of Woody Allen films as well. I could be wrong.
great
Um,
actor and director.
really, really good. Oh, the director as well, yeah. But I think having that presence in this film kind of gives Kubrick a bit of free range, where it's like you have two of the biggest movie stars of the time, just kind of hanging around, and you can do whatever you want, really, because it's Stanley Kubrick. His legacy at that point was pretty much cemented. You know, I
Hmm.
mean, it had been so long since Paths of Glory. It had been so long since 2001. It had been quite some time since. I mean, even his last film was the previous decade. But that presence and that stature, that sort of ability, kind of lends itself to, all right, you can go and do whatever you want. And what he did was essentially interpret a novel, sorry, novella, I mean, a fucking pamphlet, in a way that is so unique. It's like Bones and All, where the text is so different to the film, but fundamentally they are identical. Fundamentally,
Mm-hmm.
message is there. Fundamentally, the
Yes.
iconography is present. The changes that are made on screen from off screen are so stunning and so unique that it cements the director as the sort of owner of that creative right. It's brilliant. I think I can think of very few directors that have made an adaptation their own. I think Eyes Wide Shut might as well be its own piece. It's phenomenal. You could definitely take everything that you get out of Dream Story from Eyes Wide Shut and then some
Oh
without having
yes.
story.
Oh yes. I definitely agree with that. Um, there's something so just something so unique in the way that Kubrick just shoots everything. There's always this one thing that I noticed on this rewatch. There is this weird haze whenever
Yeah.
we go indoors. It's always like there's this bright Christmas lights all over the place, which is also like kind of fun that this is set at Christmas, and it just creates this this very dreamlike atmosphere that you wouldn't capture if the image quality was much clearer, everything was a bit sharper, by having everything a bit slightly blurry, all these lights everywhere, and you have this bokeh effect behind everyone whenever there's these close-ups and whatnot. Oh, just stunning. But speaking of the infamous party cult scene, whatever it is, like we don't even know what it is. It's just a private party. That's the way the pianist sells it. Which again, small thing that I was like, what the hell? The pianist is Todd Field, the director of everyone's favorite Twitter film of 2022, Tar. It's just like, oh, look at him, look at him. I forgot he was an actor as well. And the entire scene, I've ended up watching a couple videos just for fun, like analysis of Eyes Wide Shut, and both videos that I watched were just cuckoo banana insane analysis of the cult scene. Oh, did you know Stanley Kubrick was trying to warn us about the parties that go on at Hollywood? Everyone there has the faces covered because they are, oh, you can tell they were real people, probably pedophiles, going there. This type of party Jeffrey Epstein would have taken part in. I was just
It's
watching this, like, what the fuck? Warner Brothers cut 20 minutes from the movie because it was all the uncomfortable things. It would have revealed the truth, but it was too late to fully cancel the movie because millions had been spent, and that's why it was released ultimately. And it's confusing because people don't get it, and that's the point because they're not supposed to understand what's going on in Hollywood. I was like, what the fuck am I listening to?
it's
What's happening here?
it's rather telling that there's so many documentaries about what Kubrick films mean, and I imagine that a lot of them are made because the director is not alive to refute those allegations. It's very
I
easy to
wish.
say that The Shining faked the moon landing when the director is not around to say, "What are you on about, you mad schizophrenics? Stop that! What are you thinking?"
Even when he was
Much the
alive for
same.
those things, he just didn't care. Like, bless him, bless him.
I think it's because he knew it was fake. They went to the moon to fake the moon landing on the moon. They put a green screen on the moon and did it there.
The most
Um,
advanced effects. Make it look like shit so you can hide all the strings.
I think, like you mentioned there, on a serious note, where it's like, oh, these are the Hollywood parties that go on behind the scenes. There is a lot of that where it's just kind of people are just projecting that because of what we
Hmm.
found out in details that are not yet fully fleshed out decades later. I don't think Stanley Kubrick was trying to go, oh, look at this, and then he suddenly died. That's stuff for people that believe in Bigfoot, where it's
Mm.
like, but this is clearly not true. But as Gene Wilder said in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, something something dreamers. You know,
Yeah,
I can't remember the quote. It is a good movie though.
this is the type of insanity that would have fit in like The Scary of 61st, which is a movie I would actually
Yeah.
recommend to people. I don't know if you ever watched it.
No, I don't watch
Oh,
films anymore.
I would, I would honestly recommend it. I don't think it's meant to be taken seriously. It's literally about two girls who end up renting an apartment that was previously owned by Jeffrey Epstein, where he committed murders. Like it's so fun. It's so weird. It's shot kind of like Eyes Wide Shut. There are a lot of references to the film. Insane, insane. I recommend watching it. Let's call it a
Is it
spiritual
like that?
sequel to this.
I remember that film, The Murder of Sharon Tate, which essentially released because it was capitalizing on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Actually, well done. It's actually well done. This one.
Okay, all right,
It's from
okay.
last year, I believe. I think it's 2021 release. Maybe Shudder original something. Anyway, yeah, it's insane that so many people attach themselves to this view of like, "Well, Kubrick was criticizing the Hollywood elite. That's why also as Tom Cruise was part of Scientology. All that nonsense, just nonsense. Oh, see, he has people covering. When they say people, oh, he had people wear masks so he could actually have real people would take part into these parties. Like, what are you on about? This is a movie. It took 2 years to shoot. Do you think people were just like, yeah, I'm just gonna spend a month as an extra on this fucking movie? Like, what are you talking? Like, you don't just don't get filmmaking, my man. That's not how it works. It's insane. Like more than anything, that entire sequence to me, which I wasn't even thinking about that earlier, but listening to you speak especially kind of brought to mind like, fuck, I think I get it now. I think I get what the scene is, and it's also kind of implicit of just how people feel watching that scene. It has the ominous chanting in the background, which is like I want to say an Orthodox church spoken in Romanian played in reverse, something like that. When there's the chanting and all of this, but to me, it's just it's an orgy. It's just people watching other people have sex, and there's no real shame. You could argue about the anonymity element, but if you want to look at the journey that the good doctor Tom Cruise goes through in the film, this is the point where he's just witnessing people doing what they want, very unconventional things like 1999 mainstream film, watching doggy style and face sittings and whatnot, which with a mask is interesting because I would like to see how that works anyway. But you're watching all of these things going on, and it's probably things that the doctor has never even imagined, and the audience at the time, and some even nowadays, haven't really ever seen before. And it's this sexual liberation. It's kind of this climactic moment for him, and he actually comes halfway through the movie. Just this climactic moment on the first night where he just doesn't know what to do, and he simultaneously wants to partake in it but also always keeps himself at a distance. And that's something that's very kind of funny as well in the movie. Like there's a lot of humor as always with Kubrick, but the fact that he never has sex in any way throughout his entire nightmare strip. He's always almost there to do it, but then it never happens. And sometimes it's even for the better when he ends up discovering that, like, the prostitute from the first night actually this found out she had HIV. It's like, oh, like you can. Tom Cruise is so good because you can see on his face regret for not doing anything the first night and discovering that she had HIV, and he just has this massive smile on his face, this grin that just slowly fades away. It's like, fuck, I dodged a bullet there. Like things that could have happened. And it's, yeah, he kind of gets his comeuppance as well, which is fine. Like, how do you feel about the entire ending and what happens after he just, he keeps going back and he's basically followed around and stalked by the man I don't know, by them. Even Sidney Pollock gives him an ultimatum. They have this lovely, is it like a 15 minutes long dialogue scene? Doesn't feel like it. It's so engrossing. It's so immersive. How do you feel about like where the movie goes in terms of like this thriller atmosphere, this anxiety inducing journey?
It's such a natural change of pace, and
Mm,
it feels like it's always sort of encroaching. It feels like that is its natural progression to go into something that is a thriller, that is something that is haunting this man beyond just a state of dreamlike effect. It is actually something real and something visceral, and it's really well done. Where it's, he spills everything and then he wakes up and the mask is on the pillow. It really does express an element of fear that isn't present in the book. It is an actual realization of that fear. It's an actual physicality of it,
hmm.
and it feels like it's deserved as well, because after all of that, I don't want to draw similarities with the Louis Theroux documentary, but when he's in the Scientology documentary, he does get followed by them, which is, an apt comparison given
Yeah.
the subtext of Mr. Tom Cruise and, please don't stalk me, I've done nothing wrong. Um, it's on the whole though, it is a magical ending, and I suppose that's, where the Christmas bit comes into play as well, where they're out Christmas shopping, and they're enjoying their life and they're trying to move on, but after what we've just seen with the mask being left on the pillow, it doesn't seem like he can go back to normal, because he's in the cult now. He's seen what they do. There's no getting out of that. And again, I want to make it clear, I don't think that's like a contemporary analysis of Scientology and Tom Cruise being a Sea Org member. But what it
They're coming
is,
for you.
yeah, I think it's more just a criticism of general cultish behavior. Cults have existed before Scientology, and they'll exist after it as well.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it just goes to a layer deeper with the elements of control and the elements of the lack thereof of control that are open in the start of the film, where it's, you cannot control what another person desires, you cannot control what another person wants to do. And it comes full circle. He is then being controlled by an organization that really are just operating out of fear and can't actually change his desire, but they can change his process. And I think that's really well done. I think it's absolutely tremendous.
Mm, yeah. It's brilliant. It's just brilliant. um, in every way, in every way. There's so many small touches in here that Kubrick always has. Not only like dialogue references that come back up into movie after a while. There's like the going at the end of the rainbow in the opening scene when he's talking with the two girls, like we're gonna bring you to the rainbow, and then I think like the mask shop that he goes to is called the Rainbow or something like that. Like, there's all these elements. You can always tell everything is connected. There's like weird writing on the newspaper that Tom Cruise is reading that kind of connects to the story. It's this attention to detail is masterful. um, and even just the lengths that Kubrick goes to show just how pitiful this man is. Tom Cruise's character in the movie. It's one of my favorite things. I was watching it with my family, and it made my sister laugh a lot. And I completely agree. Like it's meant to be funny. The way that every time Tom Cruise goes anywhere, he just goes like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'm a doctor," and just shows his doctor's license, almost like it's a police badge. Just
Yes.
every time it's like I'm a doctor, and just takes it out of his, like it's the exact moves you'd see in like an FBI procedural, where just the agent shows his badge. I'm an FBI. It's so funny. It's so funny. It's just Kubrick taking the piss out of this entire character. I would even say there's, I don't know how intentional, but you could even have a queer reading of the movie if you want, because you mentioned the toxic masculinity and just fragile masculinity of this male character, and the fact that you also see meets a lot of men through this journey. For instance, there's the hotel manager that he's talking to at the entrance of the hotel, who's played by what's his face, Nightcrawler, Alan Cumming,
Oh,
wonderful
yes,
Alan
yeah.
Cumming, who's of course like a gay man and is clearly flirting with Tom Cruise. And there's this energy where you can almost feel that he's almost slightly uncomfortable by that behavior, kind of keeping him at an arm's length, which is completely different to how he behaved with the women the other night. And there's always these constant references and elements that kind of hint at maybe even a closeted uh, way of just living in the world. And you add to that that since forever, since freaking Risky Business, I believe, there have been allegations of like Tom Cruise might be gay. So again,
Oh yeah,
it's
I
it's
remember
just
those. Yeah,
so many of them. Even South Park had an episode, the
yeah.
Trapped in the Closet, one which is amazing, amazing. Which I think came out actually around this time. Interesting. I'd love to look into that. The Scientology South
Is that
Park
a new
episode.
theory? Stanley Kubrick directed an episode of South Park and then he was shot.
I wish. I wish.
I
He's
wish.
self-directed an episode of South Park. I know things about Tommy Boy, and they shot him with an heart attack. Just like die, old man. But yes, no, it's brilliant. Tom Cruise is brilliant. Nicole Kidman is so good. She's not in that much of the movie. I'd say she's in like one quarter of it, but it's so. I think the
It's more.
entire
Yeah.
yeah,
It's one of those where the presence of what her character brings to the story is more important than it's like the Hannibal Lecter sort of system. It's in it
great
for that little
comparison.
amount of
Yes.
time, but is so necessary to the fundamentals of the story that it just doesn't work without it. She's playing the most important part, which is essentially the reason that Tom Cruise is off gallivanting around with the occult.
hmm hmm Yeah, she sells it in a way that's brilliant. Almost again, she kind of delves into the dreamlike atmosphere of it all. The entire argument, it feels real and raw despite having these exaggerated performances. In any other movie, they'd be over the top, they wouldn't fit. But in here, it just hits you like a freight train. The moment she starts hysterically laughing before going into the confession, it's just like, holy shit, what? That's a bit much. That's a bit much. That's a bit too much laughing, whatever you're laughing about. And then once you know what she's laughing about, like, oh, you really don't know women, man. Like, you don't know us at all. You think you do. Even the fact that he's a doctor and he's always like analyzing women and like having them disrobe in front of him. There's all these different layers to these characters. It's just like you said, ironically so, because the entire like we've been doing this show for a year and a half now, which is crazy to think about in itself. But more often than not, we always fall into the at the end like what is best, the book or the film? And one of the arguments usually in favor of the book is it's a book. There's no like limit to how many words you can write.
Yeah,
So you can spend more time with the characters. That's usually why we like the book compared to a movie. It's like, yeah, movie's fine, but in the book I get to know them a little bit better. Not with this. How do you feel like I kind of spoiled my answer, but Ewan,
I
ultimately, what do you prefer, the book or the film? I switch out Traumnovelle or the film, the Kubrick one?
think mine was given away when I said I was sort of borderline indifferent on the book. No, I love the film. I think it's fantastic. Um, for the reasons that you've just mentioned there, we get to spend more time with these characters. It feels like the interpretation is stronger than the original process.
Mm,
Um, and the bulk of that, it, whether or not it's directed by Kubrick, whether or not it stars these great performers, the matter of fact is that there is further depth to an initial thought. He's seen the spark and he's captured it and continued it, which is really what the book should have done in the first place, but it doesn't, and therefore Kubrick picks up and heads off with it, which is great. That's exactly what was needed. More of that, and he did. He got the balance right, which is lovely. Which is it's quite rare that a film gets the balance right with an adaptation, but this one particularly not bad. Not bad, is it?
yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, where would this rank on your
Oh.
hypothetical Kubrick ranking? I'm curious. I don't remember.
I think
Did you say that Clockwork Orange is your favorite film of his?
so. The funny thing about A Clockwork Orange is that when I first watched it, I really didn't like it.
Hmm.
Um, I, I think it would. I mean, Eyes Wide Shut's probably second. I think I just have a preference to A Clockwork Orange, unless I'm missing something massive. That oh no, The Shining's first for me. The Shining,
Okay,
I adore The Shining.
The
Um,
Shining Boy.
yeah, I think Eyes Wide Shut's third. Then I mean, it doesn't speak well. I completely forgot that The Shining was a film. But yeah, I think
What
my
else did he
ranking.
direct? Oh yeah, The Shining.
Yeah, The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, Eyes Wide Shut, 2001 Path to Glory. That's my top five. There we
Nice,
go.
nice. Now, I personally, yeah, easily, Eyes Wide Shut just destroys the book in a way. Even the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, I was reading the book and I was just going like, "Oh yeah, this is the film." I remember the movie 4 years removed. I was like, "Yes, this is the film," which is a pro in a way. Like it does definitely. Kubrick definitely translated. Not only Kubrick as well. I actually want to give credit because there's a co-writer whose name we haven't mentioned. Frederick Raphael, a historic Hollywood writer. He helped co-write this, and they both did an amazing job kind of taking the novel and expanding on it, making it very much set in 1990s New York despite being shot primarily in studios in London. Amazing, incredible job. And yeah, it's easily my favorite Kubrick, which is always one of those things like, everyone has their own favorite Kubrick because it's such a rich diverse filmography. It's just basically like 10 movies that everyone has seen. But yeah, I would say for me, my ranking would be Eyes Wide Shut, Clockwork Orange, Paths of Glory, Shining, and Full Metal Jacket as my top five. I need to rewatch Barry Lyndon though. It's been like, and same for 2001. Like I haven't seen those in well over 10 years. I was too little to watch them. I was way too young for them. Um, but yes, I think this is it. This is it
That it?
for our for
That's
our
it.
Christmas episode special, last
So
episode
the
of
last episode of the year.
yeah.
What do you want the last word to be for 2022 on this podcast?
Fuck. No, 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 no. Cheeky reference to the movie at hand. Which again, what an
That was
ending!
good. That
What
was
an
good.
ending!
And then I realised we've got to plug our socials.
We do. We have to plug the socials. We have to plug the future episodes. But yes, where can the listeners find you for the new year, Ewan?
You can get me on Google. Just Google my name.
And everything does
No,
appear
no, no, no,
actually,
no.
and old photos as well.
Oh God, there's someone there that I can't get rid of. But that makes it sound almost. It's like just pictures of me when I was young.
Just
Um,
attack Google for copyright infringement. Those are my pictures.
yeah, J. Jonah Jameson it, which isn't a reference to Marvel. It's a reference to the good Mark. You know what I mean? It's a reference to the Tobey Maguire ones, but not the new one, which also has Tobey Maguire, which is just
I would say the only
that one.
Spider-Man.
Yes,
Spider-Man's.
the best trilogy of superhero themed
Yeah.
bullshit. But
Yeah.
you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at Ewan Gleadow, EWANGLEADOW. You can get my work on Cult Following. Don't listen to this podcast, which is my podcast about music and stuff. You can get me on Daily Star, Newcastle World. That's about it these days. I try to keep myself doing my own stuff now that I'm like famous and a megastar. You know,
You're
I'm the
featured on Wikipedia articles.
yeah the Jack Black of writing. No, so someone called me the Jules Holland of writing, which to be
Very
honest meant quite a
specific.
lot because I absolutely adore Jules Holland,
Hey, there
but
you
I don't have my own New Year's show yet.
go. Give it time.
I
For 2023, 2024, next season, in 1 year's time, we'll get back together to talk about some other book and film. And you can plug that in. It's like, yeah, successful.
yes.
Meanwhile, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Nikigra97, with links to everything that I do. Lots of short films, articles, essays, letterboxd, links to the Uncut Gems podcast as well, where sometimes I'm there as a guest and co-host. And yes, you can follow the show, Death Adaptation on Twitter and Death by Adaptation Pod on Instagram. One last thing, of course, this is the final episode of 2022. Amazing. It was a fun year. Lots of great guests on board that joined us for these episodes. We ended up going, instead of being just one episode a month, we ended up going for 2 episodes every month. Fun. Best choice we made, honestly, since we have more time as well. um,
Yeah, turns out working from home much easier.
frees you up so much. I love it. I'm hopefully never going back. But everyone, of course, the Christmas holiday spirit is going to live on with us into the new year, because the first episode of 2023 is going to be about none other than Die Hard, or the book as well, called Nothing Lasts Forever. But it's just primarily a good excuse to talk about Die Hard and read a book that's often forgotten. And after that, we'll also be talking about one of Ewan's favorite books and films, Trainspotting. So we're kicking off January with 2 banger episodes. So follow us, stay tuned for all of this. We hope you have a fabulous Christmas day. If you're non-religious, we hope you have a lovely holiday and a wonderful, fantastic, explosive new year. Bye bye.